Path Railway. During the Second World War, climbing was once again curtailed in Oxford, with many members of the university club being called up for military service. Once again, this period of inactivity was followed by a soaring of standards and a revolution in the attitudes of the club. The 1950s saw OUMC climbers exploring every corner of the British Isles, ticking off routes that would establish themselves as classics for years to come. Even in Oxford itself, their exploratory urges resulted in success with the discovery of the legendary Horsepath Horror. This tunnel facing was to make its mark forever on the Oxford climbing scene, years before the concept of a climbing wall had ever even been considered. A letter in Oxford Mountaineering by Lew Hill in 1957 introduced the horror to Oxford's climbers, and by 1960 a dozen or so routes had been top-roped or soloed, even before the Horsepath line had been closed to trains. After almost 60 years of climbing on the Horsepath Railway, the university contracted DR Climbing Walls to construct an indoor bouldering wall, and in 1979 Iffley Wall was opened at the university's sports centre. The days of Victorian gentlemen clambering around on the historic buildings were finally over, though it's interesting to consider what the likes of Haskett Smith would have made of this new bouldering sport.
Bouldering at Iffley has gone on in one form or another since the wall was constructed in the late 1970s. Little is known about the early days, as problems were not recorded, and Iffley seems to have been used in a fairly casual way by a small group of highly skilled and motivated climbers. A strong tradition of traversing was developed in the wall's early days, with at least 4 distinct left to right problems and 2 in the other direction. The 80s saw the rise to climbing megastardom of Johnny Dawes on the gritstone outcrops of the Peak District. With routes such as Braille Trail, Gaia and ultimately the Indian Face, he is now established as one of the finest climbers the world has ever seen. His no footholds traverse of Iffley Wall in the early 80s was perhaps the last great traverse on the wall, and at French 8B it is unlikely to have been repeated. Throughout the mid-80s, however, a new trend was developing, and hard, dynamic straight-up problems were to provide a challenge for the future generation of the Iffley boulderers. The celebrated Tom's Dyno, preserved forever by white painted dots on the wall, is typical of this dynamic period in Iffley's history.